안녕하십니까. Good afternoon. It's a great pleasure to be here at Ewha Women's University in Seoul, South Korea, one of the most famous women's universities in the world, from which there's a long legacy of distinguished graduates. Music's importance derives from the human stories that it communicates through shared experience. I aim to show how this essential point remains as we consider why music still matters in the age of generative AI, when process increasingly matters as much as product across all creative arts. In other words, how and why was this work created? And what are the intentions? What creative choices were made? And what does it aim to express? So music is important because it expresses human stories. Stories have been mentioned from the start of this event. Recall Dogwan Sansangnim talking about composers and about his personal experience. Recall also Jinwan Sangsangnim talking about sensitivity. And this is important in the current age. We all have our own stories. I have a story that I would like to share. Story about my mother and grandmother. You may recognize the last name there. That's my mother. And this is a news story from CNN, which is a major news outlet in the United States. She grew up on the west coast of the United States. She would go out to the sea and look across the sea and wonder, where is my father? Will I ever see my father? Will I ever even see his body? Here's an image of my mother and grandmother at the DMZ. Here's my grandmother when she was married to my grandfather, who disappeared in Korea many years ago. Music enables us to deal with grief, both the positive and negative aspects of life experiences. And my grandmother has continued to play piano her entire life. She still plays today, and she will be 100 in a few months. We all have different ideas about what could be in the future of music education, what matters for music education. Some of this was expressed in a recent article I co-authored with Todd Butchborn, Pam Bernard, and Gwen Moore just a few years ago. We mentioned the themes of social justice, climate change and sustainability, and peace and democracy. I need to be mindful of time in this presentation. I'm certainly aware that it's becoming morning now in Europe, so I'm waking up. But one important change that happened since the time we wrote that last article is this increasing development of these strongman authoritarian leaders worldwide. There's so many examples of this. We see this even in countries that are known for being democratic. I suppose the one example here that I will mention as being a bit of an exception is Takeichi in Japan, who does support arts to some extent. But you'll find that very often these authoritarian leaders tend to marginalize arts and tend to have an impact on the notion of artistic freedom. So authoritarian leaders are those who are not sensitive, as we were taught to consider. And as many of you have mentioned, there are risks that now come from AI, at the same time that there's a lot of amazing opportunities that also come from AI. So AI can be especially empowering when it comes to concerns for inclusion in music education. How can we include people with any kinds of learning challenges? How can we enable people to do very complex aspects of music in a more approachable and simple way? However, there's also risks when it comes to generative AI, when it comes to all kinds of chatbots taking the position of being an advisor to adolescents, keeping track of their lives, their movements, giving them all kinds of advice. And we can see many of the same problems that research shows came from social media. We can easily imagine these becoming exponentially complex when social media is empowered by AI bots. So there's a need for a new ethical awareness in our field, and certainly a need for intellectual property law to catch up with the companies involved in developing and releasing generative AI tools to the public. At the same time, we must be wary of the risks of reactionary technophobia. There's many music teachers who may be so afraid of technology that they discourage its use. That too can be a problem. At the same time, there's a need to recognize the value of human heritage, to recognize that sometimes the old way of doing things can be more effective. You see all kinds of examples in the world today, whether it comes to, for example, with cars. We have traditional ways of rolling up and down windows versus an electronic window. When it comes to an emergency situation, which kind of car would you rather be in? There's all kinds of situations like that where the older technology is actually more effective. So today I will share a few points that I hope may be food for thought, that might stimulate you to think about some of these issues in a new way. Specifically, that it's important that we responsibly balance heritage with innovation, ensuring cultural sustainability while promoting the sanctity of individual life and personal identity as a counterweight to dehumanizing discourses that can very well be coming from generative AI. One important theme when we're considering how AI is trained is called decolonization. Decolonization has to do with the fact that so many of the ideas taught in Western modeled institutions tend to be exclusively based on the ideas of Western people, to the detriment of the non-Western world, when in fact there's so many really tremendously important ideas generated by people worldwide that merit our attention. So when it comes to AI, generative AI, for instance, large language models like ChatGPT, even Chinese models like DeepSeek. I don't know how many of you have used DeepSeek and tried comparing them. Or if you look at some of the major music AI, generative AI tools such as Suno and Udio, you'll find that the vast majority of the training data for these products come from a very small number of countries, representing a very small percentage of the world, for better or worse. So whether people are conscious of this fact or not, when they're interacting with AI to generate something, a generative AI tool, very often they are engaged in a kind of neocolonialism, much like when you have Western musicians collaborating with non-Western musicians in a way that is not aiming for equality. In this book, we developed new approaches for how we can have transcultural musicianship and research that is truly aiming for equality, listening to the other. Sorry, this is hard to translate. So based on the background of some previous projects, I'm now publishing this book in collaboration with Xie Jiaxing, a Chinese musicologist, and I'll share some of the ideas that we developed together in this book. I suspect Koreans are familiar with this symbol somehow. So this one here is how an AI inevitably sees the world. Yuki Morijiri was talking earlier about how everything has to be broken down into tiny chunks of either yes or no, right or wrong. What digit is it? This is how digitization works. This is how human life actually works. There's impurity, there's curves, there's beauty somehow in this sense of balance that in a way it's emotional, it's in movement, it's in flow. It's very different from how machines function. And yet it has its own kind of balance. In the field of cognitive science, this interdisciplinary field that combines philosophy, linguistics, cognitive psychology, computer science, to look at how humans and machines can think, in that field, cognitive science, One of the most important theories to have developed across recent decades is the 4E theory of cognition. So according to the 4E theory, our thinking is embodied, embedded, enacted, and extended. And this is explained here in this chart. When you think of our experience as being embodied, it has to do with the fact that across every culture worldwide, whether we're talking about the experience of, say, pansori, or, say, something like kayagum, changu, or whether it's Western orchestral music or Ngoma, music and dance tradition in West Africa, our way of describing musical experience relies on embodied metaphors. We use metaphors from actual physical experience to describe music. So it's inevitable that our thinking is shaped by our embodied experience from the time that we're infants, the fact that we have two legs, the fact that we have two eyes, the way that we interact with the world, that shapes how we make sense of new experiences, our actual physical experience in the world. And that is something, of course, that an AI cannot comprehend because it doesn't have a body. So in similar ways, we can look at embedded, enacted, and extended. Embedded has to do with cognition occurring within a particular environment and culture, right? That our experience is shaped by that. If you're talking with, say, the Inuit in, let's say you are in Alaska, you're going to have many different ways of explaining snow, so many different kinds of snow, all the different words for every single kind of snow, whereas in many languages, snow is just snow. There's one word, right? But it's actually defined differently. People understand it in a different way, which is why you need all of these words in certain languages. So extended has to do with the fact that through all these new kinds of technologies, we are able to extend our knowledge. We preserve memories in the form of photos on devices. We preserve memories in the form of messages, audio messages. There's so much that we do cognitively today that we weren't able to do in previous generations. And so that's what extended means, extended mind. But what we've done with emotionalized, this is the 5th E that we've added to this framework to talk about music. How music connects with our personal identity through life stories that we express and interpret. And that is part of what gives life meaning by communicating about life experience as an embodied human being. So the point here is, especially when it comes to emotionalized, we can aim in this age of AI as music teachers to emphasize the points, the aspects of music that an AI is incapable of doing for the students. We can offer students the opportunities to use all kinds of AI tools to support their learning in between lessons, but then during the lesson is when we focus on what really makes the music human and expressive. And we focus on their own inner narrative, how they can understand the story of the music or make their interpretation of a story within the music so that it becomes meaningful. So again, around this theme of balance, rather than complete black and white as an AI would see things, our emphasis here in reflection on music teaching during this age of AI is to consider what kinds of balance we can have between different kinds of objectives in the field of music learning. So for instance, we have here emotion versus reason, musical process versus musical product, self-development versus altruism and community, local music genres versus global music genres, and so on. There's all kinds of different ways that we can try to map out these different aspects of musical knowledge, musical ability, musical skills, and so on, musical understandings. So even while we aim in our teaching to guide students in ways that an AI cannot provide, we can still make use of the power at the same time of big data to stimulate us in our reflections on the effectiveness of our teaching. So here's an example of, for instance, this could be comparing a single teacher's 5 different lessons. It could be comparing the approaches of different teachers within the same program. But the point is we can have different ways of mapping out how people perceive what they're achieving in their lessons. It's critically important today that we rethink assessment systems. What are we expecting the students to actually learn? How do we know that they've actually learned it? This has to be very carefully reconsidered at all levels of education, as well as how we instill an awareness of ethical issues, particularly with generative AI and with chatbots, from very young childhood all the way up through university studies. Professional development is also needed to promote profession-specific, profession-tailored approaches to AI literacy, because AI literacy in a field like music can be very different from AI literacy in a field like math or history. It's important that music teachers and music education organizations do more to connect with the concerns related with AI, particularly when it comes to threats to the professional life of artists, when it comes to issues like copyright or heritage sustainability and open innovation. It's important that AI companies are steered toward producing products that uphold the kinds of ethical concerns that we share as teachers and as musicians. So personal identity thereby needs to be affirmed as a central artistic and educational value. Pedagogies can more clearly affirm the sacredness of each individual human life in response to these kinds of concerns. And returning then to this image of the bugler at the Battle of the Chulsen Reservoir. Here is music being expressed about lives that mattered to some people, even if we may not know any of these names. Individual stories and personal identity, an inner motivation. Our unique imperfections, fragility, and even mortality are part of what makes human life precious. Still, our lives are the sum of not only circumstances beyond our control, what our ancestors called fate, but also our own choices, inevitably shaped by emotions that enable even death to reverberate with meaning. The essence of music is the sound of individual human life stories, and it only matters through emotionalized personal identity of the kind an AI can never comprehend or produce because it has never lived with a body. Despite the magic of AI, we humans are the past, present, and future of music. Music AI must be designed and used in ways that fully honor individual human creativity, cultural rights, and the sanctity of life. This may be the biggest challenge facing us in the immediate future of music education. 감사합니다.
Thank you.
네, 저는 대구교대 최미영입니다. 반갑습니다. Nice to meet you. My name is 미영 Choi. I work at Daegu National University of Education, which is located in the city of Daegu, South Korea. 먼저 인공지능과 정치적 격변이라는 거대한 파도 속에서 음악 교육의 본질을 지키기 위한 책임 있는 균형의 비전을 제시해 주신 데이비드 허버트 교수님께 깊은 감사를 드립니다. 교수님께서는 음악 교육이 지식을 전달하는 인식론적 차원을 넘어 37억 년의 생물학적 진화를 품은 인간의 존재론적 가치를 일깨워야 한다고 강조하셨습니다. 특히 기존 4E 인지 모델에 감정화를 더한 5E 모델은 비인격화를 초래하는 기술 담론에 대항하는 강력한 균형추가 될 것이라 생각합니다. 교수님의 비전과 관련하여 몇 가지 질문을 드리고자 합니다. I'd like to express my deepest gratitude to Professor David Hebert for presenting a vision of responsible balance to preserve the essence of music education amidst the waves of AI and political upheaval. You emphasize that music education must transcend the epistemological level of knowledge transfer to awaken the ontological value of humans who embodied 3.7 billion years of biological evolution. In particular, I believe your 5E model, which adds emotionalized to the existing 4E cognitive framework, will serve as a powerful counterweight to technological discourses that lead to depersonalization. In light of your vision, I'd like to ask a couple of questions. 먼저 첫 번째 질문입니다. 교수님께서는 AI가 이해할 수 없는 존재론적 의미를 강조하셨습니다. 미래의 AI가 인간의 뇌 신호나 감정 반응을 완벽하게 모방한다고 하더라도 교수님 말씀하신 생물학적 진화가 담긴 존재론적 의미는 여전히 AI가 넘볼 수 없는 영역이라고 생각하시는지, 그리고 음악 교육이 이를 어떻게 증명해 나가야 하는지 궁금합니다. You emphasize the ontological meaning that an AI can never comprehend. Even if a future AI perfectly simulates human brain signals or emotional responses, do you believe the ontological meaning rooted in biological evolution remains a domain that AI can never reach? And how should music education practically showcase this inherent human advantage in the classroom?
Thank you. That's a great question. It's impossible to know for certain what AI could become in a few centuries, or even what humans could become in a few centuries. AI is developing very rapidly, and I understand why people are so concerned. At the same time, it's very difficult to imagine an AI ever having the same kinds of understandings that we humans have from being life forms. And that is something that I think is so much embedded in our creative output as a species in all different cultures worldwide, that it seems that all an AI could be capable of, at least as far as we can imagine, is mere imitation of that, and then creation of new artworks, art forms that perhaps are really great in their own way, but are not actually expressing something about us. They're a different thing, like arts produced by an alien. I'm sure if aliens are out there, they produce some really interesting arts, and I'd love to see them. But an AI producing work beyond what humans have produced is either simply imitating, or even in the future, it's creating a new kind of work that is not human. It's not really expressing something human. It's expressing something that is based on what humans did. So this is part of why I think it's really necessary now to have a different approach to the whole notion of intellectual property. And I'm sorry, this will be impossible to translate, I think. Maybe you can summarize the main points. But I think especially nowadays, if you imagine, we have GPS, we have exact, time. We're able to stamp the time, the place, the location. We can stamp also according to retinal scan or thumbprint or whatever. Whenever a human associated with a specific body and a particular time and place creates something, there's a need for a system that will automatically register that idea. And I appreciate that Nam Sansang, one of the things he's working on that he didn't share with us today is it's a system to try to trace ideas across time, to show when training data is brought into AI, as I understand it, that there would be like a blockchain approach that would show where these ideas came from, who actually should get the credit for what proportion of this idea, and so on. I think that's very important for the future, not simply for companies that want artists to be able to survive professionally and to profit from royalties and so on, but even for the sanctity of individuals, the respect for individuals having their story, their contribution to humanity, getting credit for what they've done, their work. Sorry, it's very difficult to make this short and clear so it can actually be translated. But maybe a few points.
시간 관계상 두 번째 질문이자 마지막 질문을 드리도록 하겠습니다. 교수님은 결론에서 AI의 비인격화에 대응하여 개인적 정체성과 삶의 신성함을 언급하셨습니다. 미래의 음악 교사가 단순한 지식 전달자가 아닌 학생의 정체성을 지키는 역할을 수행하기 위해 교사 양성 과정에서 가장 우선적으로 변화해야 될 점은 무엇이라고 보십니까? This is my second and last question. This question is the one that the audience probably wonder, I think. In your concluding remarks, you stated that we must affirm personal identity and the sanctity of individual life as a response to the depersonalization of AI. For future music teachers to act as guardians of identity rather than mere knowledge providers, what do you consider the most prioritized change needed in teacher education program to prepare them for this role?
Sorry, the most prioritized change needed in teacher education. Yeah. You're asking about teacher education. I think teacher education today is deeply misguided by its emphasis on STEM subjects and test results. And especially now in the age of AI, when it comes to math and language, it's quite clear the AI is already beating us. The AI is already better. So education should focus on the other things. I don't mean we shouldn't study math. I don't mean we shouldn't study language. That's important. But it is not quite the same level of importance that it used to be. If you look back at medieval education, there was the quadrivium. Music was a significant part of medieval education in Europe. Here in Asia, you look at Confucius, he emphasized playing music, playing the guqin, right? So many of the greatest educational thinkers of all time, whether it's Tagore in India, also a composer, a poet, there's so many examples that show that music and other arts should be more prominent in education. And so should more physical activities. It's important for young children and teenagers to develop life habits so they are healthy, so they have long, healthy, productive lives. So we don't need to be spending such an enormous proportion of teacher education on language and math anymore. I'm not saying they're unimportant. I'm just saying that AI can handle these things quite well, and what we can be focusing on more now is other ways of being creative and bringing out this kind of personal identity through creative expression. And music is one of the great ways of doing that. So I think actually we have an opportunity now in the age of AI to bring back music to a prominent place in the curriculum in teacher education. I just wanted to be clear about one last point though. When I talk about music in the curriculum, what I mean here is active participation in community building activities, music making that also entails personal identity and reflection. So it's not simply about learning to play piano on your own, or learning to work with a digital audio workstation to give a few prompts and have it spit out some music, but actually being part of a community, having active participation in music making, and having opportunities for reflection on how individual and group creativity can represent one's personal identity.
네, 그래서 하나 더 추가로 말씀드리고 싶은 게 커리큘럼에서의 음악이 단순히 그냥 음악이 아니라 적극적으로 참여하고 그리고 커뮤니티가 창작 활동을 할 수 있도록 하는 것을 의미합니다. 그래서 이를 통해서 정체성을 찾고 그리고 성찰할 수 있는 그런 활동들을 말합니다. 피아노를 그냥 혼자 배우는 거 또는 디지털 프롬프트한테 음악을 이렇게 생산하라 그러는 단순한 창작 활동이 아니라 커뮤니티의 일원으로서 적극적으로 음악 창작 활동을 하고 그 과정에서 성찰을 하고 그리고 정체성을 그 과정에서 찾아 나가는 것을 의미합니다.
Thank you for insightful your answer. I look forward to seeing your 5E model and philosophy balance to serve as a vital roadmap for the future music education. Thanks again.
Thank you very much.